Hubris, a complete belief in oneself that is so strong, anything that shakes it can lead to devastating results. This week, we see someone's downfall because of their hubris. Welcome to Tyler Vance Rants. I am your host, Tyler Vance himself. Today is February 11th, 1984. Last week, we witnessed Angelo Mosca Jr. overcome all of the odds as he defeated Ivan Koloff to become the new NWA Mid-Atlantic Heavyweight Champion. As well, Mark Youngblood advanced in the NWA Television Tournament over Barry Orton, and Piper's Pit came into existence, replacing Victory Corner. Since I just mentioned Piper's Pit, let's tune in first to the WWF this week. As usual by now, Gene Okerlund and Vince McMahon will be calling the action, and our first match tonight sees Ken Jugan take on the Iron Sheik, who's accompanied by his manager, Ayatollah Blassie. Before the match gets started, Sergeant Slaughter makes an unprovoked appearance, and he immediately shoves his chin into the Iron Sheik's face, creating quite the standstill. Eventually, Sergeant Slaughter does get out of the Iron Sheik's way so that the Iron Sheik can participate in his scheduled match. In fact, he watches the match from a distance. Despite this fact weighing heavily on both Ayatollah Blassie as well as the Iron Sheik's mind, and on top of this, the crowd chanting USA, USA like a broken record, I mean, come on guys, get some new material. The Iron Sheik does manage to get a win over Ken Jugan following a belly-to-belly suplex. Since Sergeant Slaughter was already near the backstage area as he stalked the Iron Sheik like a sniper, Gene Okerlund grabs him for an interview. To Ayatollah Blassie, this is what Sergeant Slaughter has to say to you.
I can say that Fred Blassie, American traitor!
Sarge, just because Ayatollah Blassie is managing an Iranian citizen does not make him, an American citizen, a traitor to the United States. It's just not how it works. After then calling both Ayatollah Blassie as well as the Iron Sheik maggots, he then challenges the former WWF World Heavyweight Champion, the Iron Sheik himself, to a match next week.
And last and not least, the one word you hate of all, USA!
USA is not actually a word, Sergeant Slaughter. It's an acronym because it stands for United States of America. But then again, I wouldn't expect a Marine to know that. The next match sees Steve Lombardi take on the debut guest of last week's Piper's Pit, Mr. Wonderful Paul Orndorff, who is accompanied by the host of Piper's Pit himself, Roddy Piper, who acts as Mr. Wonderful's manager. Orndorff wastes little time showing just how good he really is. A quick pile driver gets a win for Mr. Wonderful. Tag team action is coming up now with Mr. Fuji and Tiger Chung Lee against the team of Ivan Putski and Andre the Giant. Putski is isolated by Mr. Fuji and Tiger Chung Lee, which is a common tactic for tag teams that are up against Andre the Giant. I mean, believe me, I don't want to face Andre either. Fortunately for Putski, Andre comes to the rescue, but instead of fighting to the death, Tiger Chung Lee and Mr. Fuji, they're heading for the hills. Relatable. Ivan Putski and Andre the Giant win via countout. Next up, Rudy Diamond sees action against Greg the Hammer Valentine, but we'll see more of him in a few minutes over in Mid-Atlantic Championship Wrestling as well. Diamond's only objective here was to survive the Hammer. However, he fails to do so and falls quickly to the figure 4 leg lock of Greg Valentine. Piper's Pit this week sees Roddy Piper interview another one of his clients. This week, it's going to be Dr. D, David Schultz. The doctor claims that nobody in the WWF is willing to face him in one-on-one competition, a claim that Roddy Piper backs up. And I kind of have to agree. The matches that the Doctor have been in really haven't tested his mettle. And you have to remember as well, it is because of Roddy Piper that Dr. Schultz is in the WWF. Piper brought Dr. Schultz here looking for competition. So this creates quite a big problem. Hopefully soon, Dr. D, you'll meet somebody that you can just slap the taste right out of. Israel Matia takes on the #1 contender for the Magnificent Morocco's WWF Intercontinental Champion next, Tito Santana. A flurry of fast-paced moves culminates in a flying forearm for Santana, and it's enough to put Matia down for the 1, 2, 3. Dr. D. David Schultz and Roddy Piper join us again, however this time they're in competition, tag team competition. They'll be facing the team of John Callahan and Frank Williams. Maybe this will be enough competition for the good doctor. Nope. The vicious beating that both Dr. Schultz and Piper put on their opponents is so severe that Frank Williams doesn't even get an opportunity to tag into the match. Piper secures a win by putting Callahan in the sleeper. The main event of Championship Wrestling sees Butcher Vachon take on Salvatore Bellomo, whose personality can simply be summed up as, "I'm from Italy." While Bellomo is more of a technical wrestler as opposed to the Butcher's more brute force physicality, he does secure a mule kick win, but he struggles to get it. With Championship Wrestling at a close, let's tune into the NWA Mid-Atlantic Championship Wrestling area and see what's going on down there. Mark Youngblood, who, as I mentioned, advanced in last week's NWA Television Tournament match, has another match tonight against Ben Alexander. Bob Caudle welcomes us as the match is already in progress, and we get to see Youngblood secure an enziguri win over his opponent. Backstage, Bob Caudle has Mark's older brother, Jay Youngblood, and Jay's broken foot is all healed now. The Briscoe brothers, Jack and Jerry, well, they better look out.
You know, it was an injury caused by the Briscoes, but that's water underneath the bridge.
Okay, I guess we're not caring about that anymore. It's all water under the bridge. Remember last week when half of the NWA World Tag Team Champions, Don Caudle, claimed that there was absolutely zero competition for him and his partner Bob Orton Jr.? And then do you also remember 3 weeks ago when Jay Youngblood said when his foot's all healed, he's going to be teaming up with his younger brother Mark and going after the World Tag Team Champions? Well, that all comes to a head here as Jay reaffirms his challenge and says that Don Caudle and Bob Orton Jr.'s days as champions are numbered. Another thing that happened last week was that Paul Jones asked both Dory Funk Jr. and Jimmy Valiant to sign a contract to face the team that Paul Jones manages, the Assassins. Despite my protests at this, Jones went ahead anyways and got the contract signed by both Funk Jr. and Valiant. So we are treated to the tag team match up next. Jimmy Valiant is surprisingly incredibly unskilled in the ring. Can he do anything other than throw a punch? Maybe a wrestling move?
And has he been after him ever since? And right here on television for
an elbow. Okay, that's on me. I apparently set the bar way too low. Valiant, please, learn some wrestling moves. Outside of the ring, Paul Jones begins pacing around and looking more nervous as time goes on. Mr. Jones, I did warn you that the Assassins have not been performing very well lately. Funk Jr. is the hero for his team and basically holds his own against both Assassin number 1 and number 2. However, he does fall victim to a switcheroo from the similarly dressed Assassins. This results in one of the Assassins getting a pin on Funk Jr., and this is followed by absolute chaos and confusion. For some reason, Mark Youngblood decides to run down to the ring and complain to the referee about Paul Jones' supposed interference, which leads to the referee restarting the match. What the hell is going on here? Like me, Paul Jones is absolutely infuriated at this amateur-level refereeing that the NWA seems to put out every single week. Jones demonstrates his fury by attacking Dory Funk Jr. with his shoe. Valiant eventually does come to his partner's aid and chases Valiant backstage, and this is followed by Rufus R. Jones now coming down to the ring. Who else is going to come out here next? Jim Crockett Jr.? Gary Hart manages quite a few people in the Mid-Atlantic Championship Wrestling area. One of these folks has been away on a tour of Asia recently, the Great Kabuki, and a couple of weeks ago Gary Hart promised that the Great Kabuki would be returning shortly. That is tonight, and the Great Kabuki is up against his opponent, Rick McCord. It's quite clear to me that the Great Kabuki's level of expertise sits in psychological warfare and intimidation rather than pure wrestling skill. He uses the dreaded nerve pinch, which pinches your shoulder right here and is supposed to simply subdue you. It is quite painful, but the problem is that the Great Kabuki uses this not once,
and we've even seen him change colors,
not twice,
as Kabuki had him around the neck, choking him,
but 3 times in total the entire match.
During this hour, you're going to see our Mid-Atlantic champion,
and for long periods of time while he's at it. The Great Kabuki eventually does finish McCord off with the claw, and I have to wonder, maybe Baron von Raschke might not be so happy about that. The NWA United States, as well as true NWA World Heavyweight Champion Dick Slater, is backstage, and he claims that Ric Flair is going around impersonating him. You see, Ric Flair still has the physical World Heavyweight Championship belt, and the NWA Board of Directors are still recognizing the Nature Boy as the true and legitimate World Heavyweight Champion. We are getting closer to the rematch for the World Heavyweight Championship between Slater and Flair, so at least soon we will have the final answer on this World Heavyweight Championship problem. Speaking of champions, the new NWA Mid-Atlantic Heavyweight Champion, Angelo Mosca Jr., is in a non-title match against his opponent Bill White, while his father, Angelo Mosca Sr., joins Bob Caudle on commentary. During the match, Jimmy Valiant returns to the ringside area and starts parading himself around with Paul Jones's wardrobe, specifically part of his tuxedo jacket and one of his shoes. While this is happening, Angelo Mosca Jr. does manage to get a crossbody win over White and celebrates by joining the Boogie Woogie Maniac in destroying Paul Jones's property. Well, Jimmy, I guess we'll just add destruction of personal property to your rap sheet. When will it end, Valiant? The alliance between the NWA World Tag Team Champions Bob Orton Jr. and Don Kernodle are backstage with Bob Caudle, and they're joined by the former NWA Mid-Atlantic Heavyweight Champion, Ivan Koloff. You see, the gap between the Soviet Union and the United States has been so expertly bridged by the alliance of Dick Slater, Bob Orton Jr., Don Kernodle, and the Russian Bear Ivan Koloff that both Orton Jr. and Kernodle not only present the Russian Bear with an American flag, but they also make him an honorary member of the United States. Koloff is so happy about this that he says that going forward,
I want to say one thing. I will represent the American people very well whenever I get the Mid-Atlantic title.
God bless the USA. Another ally of Orton Jr., Kernodle, Koloff, and Slater is Gary Hart, the man who manages all of those, as well as the man he's accompanying to the ring right now, the Big Cat Ernie Ladd. And he is going to be facing off against Greg the Hammer Valentine. Tournament time. This match is part of the NWA Television Championship tournament, and the winner will advance to the semifinals. While cats are usually known for their 9 lives, it seems that Ernie Ladd has used up most of them by this time in his career. The Big Cat is simply out of his league when it comes to Greg the Hammer Valentine, and you know what? It's not Valentine's superior wrestling skill that causes him to win the match either. Ladd decided that things were looking so bad in his losing effort against Greg the Hammer Valentine that he decided to throw any opportunity that he did have at winning the match out the window and give himself a positive 0% chance of winning by throwing the referee aside, resulting in him getting a disqualification. Greg Valentine advances to the semifinals. The main event of Mid-Atlantic Championship Wrestling sees the NWA United States, as well as true NWA World Heavyweight Champion Dick Slater, take on Sam Houston. The champion uses this opportunity to demonstrate to Ric Flair his natural ability and wrestling skill, basically a preview of what's going to happen in their upcoming rematch for the NWA World Heavyweight Championship. Slater picks up an easy win following a falling chop. To round out the week, Bob Caudle catches the recently successful Greg the Hammer Valentine for a quick interview. Valentine is upset with his match against Ernie Ladd. He's upset that Ladd got himself disqualified and feels robbed of a proper victory. Me too. The Hammer then goes on to say that he wishes 2 other competitors in the NWA Television Tournament luck, and he gives 2 different reasons for this. The first person that Greg Valentine wishes luck to is Dory Funk Jr. You see, Dory Funk Jr. is in the tournament as well, and his bracket pits him against Dick Slater, someone that Greg Valentine absolutely hates. If Dory Funk Jr. wins his match, it eliminates the Dick Slater problem. However, on the other spectrum, Valentine wishes luck to Slater. And the reason being is because if Slater beats Dory Funk Jr. and advances to face the Hammer, he can strike Slater like an anvil, something he's been practically begging for recently. Finally, we get an answer as to why Mark Youngblood and Rufus R. Jones rushed the ring earlier to help out both Dory Funk Jr. and Jimmy Valiant. While I assumed it was random at the time, they set me straight. They are joining Jimmy Valiant's crusade against Paul Jones. Oh, for the love of Paul Jones and, by association, the Assassins, now have more enemies than I can count on a single hand. The prime suspect, Jimmy Valiant, Dory Funk Jr., Baron Von Raschke, Dusty Rhodes, Mark Youngblood, and Rufus R. Jones. That's 2-to-1 odds in favor of the Boogie Woogie Maniac. If I were Paul Jones, I'd be getting a little worried right now, and I'd also be looking for more experienced and capable help, because he's certainly going to need it. Here is one final note to finish the week. On Saturday, February 11th, 1984, so today, Tito Santana challenged the Magnificent Morocco for the WWF Intercontinental Championship, and he won. This not only marked the first time that Santana won the Intercontinental Championship, but it also marked the first time that a Mexican-American superstar did so as well. That brings us to the end of the week. Greg the Hammer Valentine advances in the NWA Television Championship tournament. Tito Santana becomes the new WWF Intercontinental Champion. Sergeant Slaughter challenges the Iron Sheik for a match next week. And Paul Jones's life fell apart. Signs have shown recently that the Assassins have not been competing up to standard. And I have made mention of this many times. I'm not a wrestler. And the fact that Paul Jones is, and he could not see this, means that his hubris was so in the way that he could not envision any other possible outcome than the Assassins winning their tag team match against Dory Funk Jr. and Jimmy Valiant. But Paul Jones did get another outcome, and that outcome has now escalated the situation well beyond his control. He's now surrounded and outnumbered. Only time will tell if Paul Jones can put his hubris aside for just a little bit of time so that he can snatch victory from the jaws of defeat. Thank you so much for tuning in to this week's episode of Tyler Vance Rants. Before we go, I want to know something. Are you on Jimmy Valiant's side in this war, or are you on Paul Jones's side? Let me know down in the comments below. Don't forget to like the video, subscribe, hit the bell so you never miss an episode, follow me on social media as well, and I will see you next week. So long for now. As well, Mark Youngblood. You have no idea how hot it is in this room with this leather jacket. Holy crap. It is definitely not February 11th, 1984 right now. Well, it's definitely not February 11th right now. I tell you what, it's so hot outside. Woo! And the first match on something, as usual, Gene Okerlund and Vince McMahon are starting things off. They're not starting things off. Gene Okerlund, Vince McMahon. Who's the best commentator? Neither. Remember last week when half of the World Tag Team Champions, Don Kernodle, stated that there was absolutely zero competition for him and his partner, Bob Orton Jr., in the tag team division? What the heck was that kind of a sentence?